Welcome to Dreamtale Sleep Stories. Tonight's reading is Confessions of a Lost Sock. Settle into your bed or sofa and let your shoulders, jaw, and eyelids grow heavy. Inhale slowly, 1, 2, 3, and sigh the air away, allowing the day to fade into quiet dark. With every soft inhale, you invite fresh English phrases. With every gentle exhale, stray thoughts drift farther off. Behind my voice flows a gentle 528 Hz melody, renowned for guiding the mind toward deep relaxation. Keep your eyes closed or follow the captions, whichever feels right. Simply receive the rhythm and resonance of the language. Deep in rest, tonight's phrases will take root like seeds, ready to bloom into stronger English skills with the morning light. When you feel settled, hold that unhurried breath and allow yourself to drift into the tale. Confessions of a Lost Sock begins now. And when the story's final line has faded, the music will linger a little longer, carrying you gently deeper into sleep. Confessions of a Lost Sock. Sol was a left white sock who believed life should come in pairs and neatly folded endings. On laundry day, he tumbled into the washer with his partner, confident they would emerge together, as always. But the machine coughed, rattled, and sighed like an old storyteller, and the drum swallowed more hope than water. When the cycle ended, the door clicked open, and warm steam curled out like a secret escaping. Sol waited for his partner to wiggle forward, but only lonely towels slumped into the basket. He shouted into the drum, hearing his voice bounce back in hollow, soapy echoes that felt like goodbye. That was how a perfectly ordinary sock became officially lost and unofficially dramatic. The laundry room smelled of detergent, bravery, and a hint of mysterious lint that clung to everyone's past mistakes. An old handkerchief named Hank peered over the basket's rim like a librarian patrolling silence. Missing a partner? Hank asked, the corners of his cotton smile creasing with veteran sympathy. Sol admitted the truth, which hurt less than the spin cycle and more than any bleach ever could. Hank told him legends of a whirlpool portal behind the washer, unmatched socks, learned radical independence. Another tale insisted that the dryer door led to a glamorous exile under the couch in the next room. Sol preferred an ending involving rescue, confetti, and a reunion stretch that would make swans jealous. A frayed t-shirt named Tino flexed his threadbare sleeves and proposed forming the Lost Garment Alliance. A yawning house slipper called Slippy agreed, mostly because he approved any plan that included naps between steps. Together, they mapped the apartment like explorers who believed every dust bunny was a negotiable border. Hank served as the strategist, folding plans with crisp precision and an encouraging lack of judgment. Tino practiced motivational speeches that always turned into warm-up chants for imaginary laundry Olympics. Slippy volunteered to carry snacks, which turned out to be exactly one forgotten button and a breadcrumb. Soul felt less alone, like a sentence finally finding its missing comma. The hallway was a runway of scuffs, and the carpet held a galaxy of crumbs that charted nightly constellations. Under the couch lurked a committee of pens without caps, who voted to ignore all textile diplomacy. A dust fortress rose beside the bookshelf, guarded by a retired spider who now did consulting. The radiator sang a metal lullaby whenever the window cracked open and admitted gossiping city air. Soul asked the floorboard creaks for directions, and they only complained about the weather and the rent. Every corner offered two possibilities: a trap for good intentions and a door to better jokes. The apartment was not large, but it contained an astonishing labyrinth of tiny dramas. In the shadow between the washer and the wall, Soul discovered a glimmering thread, like moonlight caught on a nail. He tugged gently and pulled free a loop that smelled unmistakably of his missing partner's detergent brand. Hank identified it immediately, explaining that scent memory was a textile's version of handwriting. The thread pointed downward, straight into a narrow gap, where forgotten coins whispered metallic folklore. Soul shivered, not from cold, but from the sudden possibility that hope was technically evidence. Tino wedged his shoulder seam into the gap and widened it with noisy optimism. Even Slippy woke fully, which everyone recognized as the true measure of urgency. They slid into Baseboard Valley, where the dust drifted in slow parades and the light traveled in considerate angles. Soul learned to breathe through lint, which felt like hugging a warm cloud while pretending not to sneeze. A family of paper clips offered them an escort, clicking in polite rhythms like tiny castanets. Hank asked the oldest clip for recent news, and it reported rumors of a sock crossing at dawn. The rumor included a warning. The vacuum patrolled these corridors with a hunger for unscheduled reunions. Soul's heel prickled at the name, for every garment knew that the vacuum was both legend and statistic. The alliance tightened formation, as if choreography could protect them from suction. The vacuum announced itself with a growl that started under the couch and flexed into a consuming roar. Slippy froze, which looked almost identical to his usual stance, but with more existential commitment. Tino puffed his chest print and shouted, "We are citizens, not debris," which impressed absolutely nobody. Hank pulled everyone behind a baseboard ridge, where the wind of suction finned, but never vanished. Soul watched loose receipts take flight, scribbling panicked poetry as they soared into the plastic belly. A coin spun like a moon, then rattled away, refusing to be conquered by mere household authoritarianism. The vacuum moved on, bored by resistance that lacked nutritional value. When silence returned, it wore scuffs and apologies, but it fit well enough for marching forward. Soul counted the survivors and decided counting hope was more sensible than counting fear. Hank offered a proverb about threads and patience, which everyone pretended to understand immediately. Tino did 3 push-ups and declared morale officially toned. Slippy yawned so wide that dusk almost fell into him and needed help climbing back out. They advanced, keeping to the shadows, because drama looks better with careful lighting. Soul tucked the glimmering thread into his cuff like a talisman that doubled as choreography. The Council of Pens insisted on a toll. 1 anecdote per traveler, payable in entertaining truth. Hank told a story about surviving a nosebleed and earning the respect of an entire backpack. Tino recounted the time he photobombed a family picture by being wrinkled at a historical monument. Slippy shared a dream where he won a marathon by napping strategically at every water station. Soul confessed he sometimes wished he were a glove just to understand what holding felt like. The Pens, satisfied and slightly jealous, lowered a bookmark bridge made of expired coupons. They passed, stepping delicately on percentages and promises never redeemed. The balcony door stood ajar, exhaling cool night that smelled like wet pavement and unanswered questions. City lights winked like distant laundromats, advertising 2-for-1 destinies. Tino argued for a heroic leap into fresh air, while Hank warned that freedom without socks was barefoot trouble. Slippy voted to remain indoors, citing a lifelong commitment to temperature control. Soul stared at the street below, imagining his partner navigating traffic with rebellious elegance. He almost stepped into the night, but the glimmering thread tugged his attention back indoors. Inside still held clues, and outside held poetry that could wait until the credits. The kitchen tiles were a chessboard that remembered every careless crumb, like a scandalous headline. A regiment of utensils clanged in a drawer, practicing synchronized skepticism. The refrigerator hummed a tune called "I Know All Your Secrets" and pretended it was jazz. Hank negotiated with a sponge for crossing rights, paying in compliments about its unparalleled absorbency. Tino got distracted by a motivational magnet, promising greatness, then tried to bench press a teaspoon. Slippy enjoyed the rug's softness so thoroughly that he briefly forgot the concept of urgency. Soul found another thread, faint and familiar, near the base of the back door mat. The second thread was caught on a tiny splinter, as if the door had bitten gently and apologized. Hank concluded that the missing partner had attempted an exit but been pulled back by destiny or door habits. Soul imagined the scene: a brave hop, a snag, a twist, and a retreat disguised as strategy. Outside, rain teased the alley, promising both cleansing and confusion if they went searching now. Tino offered to sprint a perimeter check, but the kitchen clock insisted on midnight with persuasive ticks. They postponed the outside hunt, agreeing that wisdom sometimes looked exactly like patience. Soul whispered to the doormat, and it promised to remember every footstep until morning. The alliance camped under the table, which felt like a cathedral for crumbs and whispered plans. Moonlight pooled on the floor, pretending to be a map nobody fully understood. Hank kept notes on a napkin, which added gravitas and occasionally salsa memories. Tino stood guard until he fell asleep doing lunges, which counted as both failure and dedication. Slippy dreamed of being a cloud slipper, drifting across a sky that smelled like clean cotton. Soul rehearsed greetings for his partner, editing out the parts that sounded like accusations. Somewhere in the walls, the building exhaled, as if blessing small courage with older patience. At dawn, the apartment stretched, and light crawled across surfaces with the confidence of new beginnings. The doormat reported fresh footsteps leading to the hallway, small and sock-sized, but staggered like improvisation. Hank connected the dots, or rather the crumbs, into an arrow that pointed toward the storage closet. Tino flexed, declaring himself emotionally ready to wrestle destiny, or at least a stubborn hinge. Slippy asked for coffee, realized he could not drink, and settled for moral support in mug proximity. Soul felt his threads buzz, as if reunion had a frequency only textiles could hear. They approached the closet like diplomats, entering negotiations with a famously grumpy kingdom. Inside the closet, towers of boxes leaned like ambitious mountains, practicing democracy. A belt looped lazily over a hook, greeting them with a nod that implied ancient wisdom and recent naps. A choir of plastic bags rustled a hymn, praising endurance and suspiciously sharp corners. Hank asked permission to pass, which the winter coat granted with aristocratic flutters. Tino tried to impress a jump rope and got tangled in a relationship he wasn't ready for. Slippy found a lost button and adopted it as a pet named Dot, promising walks and occasional polish. Soul searched the floor, listening for the soft music of familiar cotton. In a dim corner, he found a faint print in dust shaped exactly like his partner's toe pattern. Hank verified the pattern, citing a case study from the Atlas of Footwear Shadows. The print pointed deeper, yet the air smelled less of detergent and more of cardboard diplomacy. Soul wondered if he was chasing memory rather than a person, which is to say, chasing himself. Kino reassured him by flexing dramatically, a gesture that always meant, "We believe in you." Slippy offered a nap in solidarity, which was oddly comforting and completely unhelpful. Soul tucked the fear away, where it could not snag on present courage. The vacuum ambushed them in the corridor, roaring with bureaucratic inevitability and excellent suction. Hank deployed an emergency blanket strategy, which involved throwing a towel like a cape over the nozzle. Tino cackled the power cord with wrestler theatrics and sincere clumsiness. Slippy slid under the belly and flicked the switch with a heroic toe, discovering a destiny he could reach. The vacuum coughed, sighed, and fell quiet, suddenly interested in philosophy and naps. Soul stood trembling, because saved is still another way of saying almost lost. They celebrated quietly, aware that triumph is loud enough without shouting. The apartment door opened, and their human returned, humming a tune that smelled like bus rides and coffee. He muttered about a quiz, a drizzle, and a sock that kept disappearing, like a magician's assistant. The human lifted the disabled vacuum, glanced at the towel cape, and decided to investigate later. Hank whispered that timing is the polite cousin of luck, and everyone nodded as if briefed. Tino hid behind a plant that did not exist to emergency-proof t-shirts, but tried anyway. Slippy froze, achieving his finest statue impression to date. Soul watched the human's shoes, hoping they carried news from the wider world. The shoes, clay-colored and brave, reported they had seen a lone sock near the building's mailboxes. They claimed the sock smelled like the same detergent and walked with a determined, slightly wobbly step. Hank asked whether the sock seemed happy, and the shoes said happiness looked busy at the time. Soul thanked them with a respectful bow, careful not to scuff either dignity or floor. Tino proposed a mailbox raid, which sounded cooler than the reality of pushing envelopes around. Slippy practiced being inconspicuous, which is hard for a slipper, but not impossible with commitment. They set out, trailed by the quiet courage of shoes that remembered everything. The stairwell wind carried hallway gossip and a faint perfume of old successes and newer deliveries. A bulletin board displayed flyers for tutoring, concerts, and a missing mitten who preferred jazz. They descended like a parade that forgot its instruments, but kept perfect rhythm anyway. Hank negotiated with a cranky doormat guarding the second-floor landing and promised to send postcards. Tino paused to demonstrate a lunge, earning polite applause from a skeptical umbrella. Slippy admired the echo of his own footsteps, a sound that made stillness feel sociable. Soul counted each step as a promise, habits turning into rituals that held him together. The mailroom buzzed with envelopes rehearsing their alibis and catalogs boasting glossy futures. A metal slot confessed it had seen a soft blur leap past at dawn, heading toward the lobby. Hank analyzed scuff marks that looked sock-sized and recent, while Tino posed like a detective on a cover. Slippy discovered a warm patch where something had waited, perhaps breathing, perhaps gathering courage. Soul pressed his cuff to the spot and felt a faint echo, like a greeting traveling in reverse. The thread talisman tugged again, this time with the stubborn rhythm of reunion. They followed the heartbeat of lint toward automatic doors that sighed like stage curtains. The lobby shone with tile confidence and a security camera that believed in narrative arcs. A plant in a bronze pot offered directions in the form of benevolent leaning. Hank secured elevator cooperation by promising to press buttons with elegant precision. Tino flexed at the concierge desk, which did not require flexing, but benefited from enthusiasm. Slippy greeted a sunbeam and was immediately forgiven for everything he had ever forgotten. Soul glimpsed a familiar curve of fabric near the umbrella stand and nearly unraveled from excitement. The curve vanished when a gust from the opening door rearranged the morning like a new paragraph. Outside, the sidewalk glittered with drizzle, and the city's breath fogged the edges of every possibility. A newspaper stand rustled gossip about a sock seen hitchhiking on a scooter's handlebar. Hank interviewed a pigeon who claimed the sock tipped in breadcrumbs, which established credibility instantly. Tino traced a trail of tiny fibers across a bench, proud to spot details despite his bold print. Slippy listened to the curb, which hummed directions learned from tires and occasional violinists. Soul felt near enough to speak without shouting, as if the city itself wanted to help. They turned down an alley where murals practiced remembering forgotten faces. In the alley, Soul finally found his partner, resting on a windowsill like a tired cloud. The partner's cuff was stretched, and a proud grass stain told the story of a brave detour. They touched threads, relief spilling over them like warm light after stubborn rain. The partner confessed he had been adopted briefly by a child, then promoted to puppet, then furloughed. Hank, Tino, and Slippy cheered, then politely pretended not to notice the tear at the partner's heel. Soul realized reunion does not always mean restoration, but can still mean home. They began the journey back, two socks again, together and not the same. Back at the apartment, a practical problem waited where emotions had not bothered to look. The human owned another pair of nearly identical socks, and the drawer was a democratic chaos. Hank proposed a test of true partnership, synchronized stretching, and shared jokes only the real pair would know. Tino suggested an arm wrestling match, then remembered socks lack arms and pivoted to boasting. Slippy offered a nap-based solution, which somehow clarified nothing and improved morale noticeably. Soul and his partner performed their private wrinkle routine, learned during long dryer conversations. The drawer applauded with slides and soft thumps, and the test certified the reunion as authentic. Just when celebration tasted like buttered toast, the vacuum woke from philosophy and filed a grievance. It accused the socks of evading lawful cleaning procedures and called for immediate suction-based justice. Hank objected on procedural grounds, producing a lint ballot that declared the corridor a sanctuary. Tino flexed so hard that the poster on the wall briefly believed in miracles. Slippy maneuvered the button into a charm that reflected light, dazzling the vacuum's eye for a heartbeat. Soul stepped forward, voice steady, declaring that socks were citizens and not seasonal decorations. The vacuum hesitated, hearing in his words the quiet strength of perfectly ordinary heroes. They drafted a treaty on the back of an old receipt, witnessed by the plant and several dignified crumbs. The vacuum agreed to scheduled cleanings, with clear evacuation paths and no surprise raids. Hank promised quarterly meetings to review suction policies and encourage respectful worrying. Tino volunteered for community fitness sessions, though nobody asked and everyone suspected fun anyway. Slippy negotiated nap zones with soundproofing made of polite silence. Sol added a clause affirming the right of all garments to pursue warmth and partnership. The treaty passed by unanimous, lint-based acclamation and one reluctant hum. Later that week, the humans sorted laundry and placed Sol's partner in a bag destined for donations. The partner had grown too thin for heavy use, yet smiled with a courage that shined through frays. Sol panicked, then breathed, remembering that love sometimes means letting another story continue elsewhere. Hank squeezed his hem reassuringly, while Tino promised to carry messages in motivational font. Slippy offered a farewell nap, which turned out to be the perfect length for acceptance. Sol whispered promises into the partner's threads, vows made of patience, laughter, and occasional fabric softener. The bag rustled, not sadly, but like pages turning. Days later, a postcard arrived from the donation center, smelling faintly of detergent and adventure. It reported that the partner had become part of a puppet theater, starring as a wise cloud with impeccable timing. Hank read the card aloud, adding footnotes that did not exist, but improved rhythm. Tino practiced applause until the plant asked for an encore at a sensible volume. Slippy cried exactly one quiet tear, which mostly meant he blinked a little slower. Sol felt a complicated happiness, the kind that respects distance without dismissing love. He tucked the postcard beside the treaty, letting both declare a future made of agreements and stories. Sol realized that being lost had introduced him to alliances, hobbies, and a surprising belief in treaties. He started guiding other unmatched socks through the apartment, teaching them to read crumbs and courage. Hank launched a seminar series called Resilience for Fabrics, with optional workshops in graceful folding. Tino hosted fitness mornings that doubled as community theater, featuring lunges and dramatic readings. Slippy opened a nap lounge where dreams were considered research and snoring was peer review. The vacuum, now a civil servant, offered transport on low power to gently move citizens between rooms. Sol understood that found is a verb, renewed daily with small choices and good company. One evening, thunder grumbled, and rain braided the city into glossy strands of midnight silver. The balcony door clicked open again, inviting curiosity that wore raindrops like shy jewelry. Hank suggested a brief expedition to honor their courage's anniversary, which everyone agreed was now a holiday. Tino gathered the team, promising push-ups for the forecast and storytelling for the lightning. Slippy prepared the nap wagon, which was mostly himself, lying flatter than usual. Sol stepped into the damp air, remembering the first missing heartbeat and the thread that became a map. They ventured out, not far, just enough to prove the treaty covered moonlight too. Back inside, Sol tied the glimmering thread around a small nail, letting it hang like a modest banner. Visitors asked what it meant, and he explained it was a receipt for courage, payable in future kindness. Hank archived the tale on a napkin with a stain shaped like applause. Tino promised to retell the story whenever anyone needed warm laughter with balanced form. Slippy yawned, which in their language meant good night, well done, see you in brighter folds. The vacuum purred a respectful lullaby, humming the rhythm of treaties kept and dust forgiven. Soul settled beside the drawer's edge, a not-lost sock whose confession had become a map for others.